Hello, internet friends, and welcome to Keep the Game Moving. This is a special double episode because for the first time, we have two GMs for the price of one. I am so happy to be joined by John Castillo and Josh Clark, who, if you are local to the Bay Area, you probably know, run games together, which we've discussed on a previous podcast where our good friend Morgan derisively mentioned, and we couldn't remember their names. I was gonna gloss over that part.
You did remember mine. That's fair.
There you go.
And why wouldn't you?
But it's a really, so first of all, guys, thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having us.
It's a really so Morgan and I talked about it in terms of we sort of co-GM'd out of necessity / last minute thing. And so we didn't have the opportunity to be intentional about it. And so what I really like about what you guys do is that you are very intentional about your co-GMing. But I always start by asking, so let's start, Josh, how did you start GMing?
Oh my God. We'd have to go back to like junior high, right? Being a nerdy kid, my only friend was also into role playing. So, but I think it all kind of really blew up in the early 90s when Vampire hit the scene. And all of a sudden people were interested in playing things that weren't half elves. And that was nice. And then, various friends we've encountered through like game stores and whatnot introduced us to Call of Cthulhu. And, I think I got a clearance package of all the Unknown Armies books. So, just sort of snowballed from there.
Now, when you were in junior high, were you always the GM?
It was mostly me and my buddy Mason kind of trading off. Right. It was actually kind of the opposite of the problem that I think a lot of gamers have today, where everyone's a GM, right? At that point, everyone was a player. It's just, you wanted to play, so someone had to GM.
Interesting. And John, what about you?
I was thoroughly browbeat into it by Josh. Josh was around when I first started gaming, and I was a player in my junior high days. D&D and stuff like that. And I didn't have any desire to GM, but it really started with, there were games that I wanted to play, but nobody else was running them. So I ended up needing to figure out how to run them. And I got my joy of kind of playing the game through running those games. So like Star Wars was a good example of the West End games. Star Wars. There was definitely people that wanted to play it, but nobody wanted to do, that level of deep dive into, there wasn't even Wikipedia back then. It was just read all these source books.
Right.
I was willing to do that because I already loved the world. But
when you ran West End, did you actually read verbatim? So the West End Star Wars game had a very cinematic kind of veneer to it. Yeah. And one of the things it did that I really haven't seen elsewhere is there would be cutscenes where you would as the GM, you'd have like a page of text of like, meanwhile on Bespin, and you'd I read it to the players.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I was like, what do I do with this? And so did you just read it to them? What did you?
And that's, it was probably my first, I didn't know I was getting exposed to cinematic gaming at the time. It was just like, well, the source book says to do it, so let's just go ahead and do it like this. But that's how I thought of those games. It was easy for me to run a Star Wars movie in my head and go from there. And it became like, when we started playing more Vampire and other, I'd say theater of the mind or narrative based games. I think my exposure to that made it easier to do that kind of style of gaming.
So what's the first game you guys co-GM'd, and how did that come about?
So I think there's actually a little bit of a dispute on this. And John believes that it was our World War I Call of Cthulhu game, which is one of my favorite games. I love it dearly. John, do you want to tell the story of our first run of that? Because it involves
You're talking about the meetup that we had before we started going to cons. Like we ran it at your house, right?
Yeah, this was. I mean, like we went to cons as teenagers, but then there was like a 15-year gap.
Yeah,
right.
I was not a con goer and was not interested in going to cons back in this time. I really just had my core crew of people, but as you know, you get into your 20s and 30s, that group dissipates. Ooh. So if you want a game, you better find other people who are around to do it with. So we started up this group on a meetup, and we came up with this grandiose idea of running. I think it was like 8 people at this table, and this was like back in July of 2009. I actually went and did the lookup for all the emails that we sent out. Yes, so. And one of the guys that showed up to this, and I was really nervous about it, Josh comes to me and he says, "Hey, we're running this World War I game. Great news. I got a guy who's, really into Call of Cthulhu, and he's also, really knowledgeable in like World War I and World War II. His name's Gil Treviso." And I'm like, "That's a horrible idea. Please don't bring anybody who's an expert in this stuff to this game." It's the first game I'm really like, willing to run for strangers. And I don't want some guy, telling me what weapons I'm not supposed to be having in this time period. And, I barely did research on this at the time.
Who the hell are you people?
Yeah, so I was really nervous about having Gil in the game. I'd never met him before. This was the first time I met him. And he tells the story a lot more animated, but apparently
there's probably more swearing too.
My disclaimer was basically telling all the players, "Look, I don't care about what you know or come into the game or what. I'm just trying to tell a story, and don't be coming at me with the the encyclopedia of."
You should assume that our World War I is entirely wrong. Just get that out of your system right now. Right.
Yeah. He was pretty convinced I was like inches away from his face, like yelling at him. But which may have been true. I don't know. But anyway, I believe that is the first time we actually co-GM'd a game.
Yes. I think you may be right, but our first co-GMing at a con
was Jailbreak. Yeah, for sure.
Which is a great game with the right players.
A game you have run several times.
8 times.
So you start co-GMing. What is the planning process like for that? Did you decide, hey, let's run something together, and then start to build the game? Did you have the game and
I want to say it was born out of kind of a plot twist. There is a plot twist in that game. I don't want to give it away. It was 12 years ago or however long, but
right.
Yeah. There's a plot twist where I'm GMing one section and then it pivots and Josh is running the next. And there's definitely a change in the pace of the game. So that was the cool little twist, and it just worked out from there. And we just started making a lot of our games where if I'm not in the driver's seat, I'm doing other things that's additive to the experience. So
when in the World War I game, when you're running, Josh, what are you doing?
Well, so I mean, in World War I in particular, a lot of it, in general, if one of us is running, the other one will be doing, character work, kind of keeping an eye on what the players are saying. John and I were talking about this earlier. In every game, there is the part where everyone's excited and they're all shouting their ideas. I want to do this. Well, I want to do it. Right. Having another GM there can mean that doesn't get lost in the mix. Something that John does that I just could not love more is, as I'm running, he will be just kind of lurking in the corner, quietly texting me ideas or chatting me ideas. Hey, this would be a great time to have an axle break on the wagon. Hey, that guy got bit by whatever. What if that wound gets infected? Right. So that kind of just, everyone has good ideas, right? Like, I mean, this is the whole indie game revolution, right? GMless games, player empowerment. I think all that comes out of there are just too many GMs. Everyone's a GM. And so why not use their ideas?
And when they're players, they're contributing to the narrative, even though, if Josh is worried about looking up a table or referring to his notes or whatever, I want to make sure that all these things are getting paid attention to and eventually become part of the narrative.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I found, so I've played in your games with coGMs, and there is a real kind of ebb and flow to who's running. Like, I don't know if it's a scene by scene breakdown or something like that, but there's a real ebb and flow. And the interesting part is whoever is kind of, like, to use your phrase, in the back seat, like, is really actively listening to the players, and that's a really interesting aspect of it. How is that a rhythm that you sort of established beforehand? Is it kind of a feel thing? I mean, by now it's probably a feel thing. I don't know, but
I don't know. What do you think, Josh? I have my opinion on when it happened.
So, I mean, this is the other part of, I'm not sure that we are going to be a goddamn bit of help to anyone. And what I mean by that is John and I have just known each other since high school. And we have creepy friend telepathy, and we finish each other's sentences. Sandwiches. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure how well the coGMing works if you can't just read the other guy's mind.
Yeah.
See, now that's an interesting point, because when Morgan and I coGM'd, in the small time that we had to be really intentional about like, okay, you're going to do this part, I'm going to do this part. And I mean, we both talked about how we felt like a kind of a deference to the other person. And so there was a lot of, like, it was almost like, oh God, a dated reference. It was like Heckle and Jekyll. Oh no, after you. No, after you. No. And, and so, I think you guys have that kind of creepy telepathy that you're talking about, but I also think there is more to it than that. And maybe you're not, maybe it's not as cut and dried as you're saying, like, scene 3, I'm taking this one.
No, it's not that at all. The deference that you're talking about is happening nowadays. We are more streamlined about it, where I think it's important to whoever is running the scenes. And I think, Ezra, you may have been in the Jailbreak game, but I don't know if you played any of the roundtable games that we've done.
I haven't played any of them. No, I've only played the Jailbreak.
So in the roundtable games, there's a lot more, Josh is either in the driver's seat or I am. And then the other guy is, like, almost completely removed from the game table. And what that does is it gives the players one place that the narrative is coming to them from, and they can ask their questions to that one place and whatever. But, Josh and I have had to come up with a communication style that, that is also beyond the, knowing, looks across the room of, hey, do that thing now, kind of thing. Right. So we're typing back and forth and he's looking at notes and whatnot. And we had to do that because of what you're talking about. The players, if they think there's two people that are controlling the story, they don't really know where to direct their questions, who's in charge. We've had games like that where both of us were there and both answering questions, and it ended up causing more distraction for that reason. So it just became easier to just separate ourselves. And it looks like I'm just lurking in the corner, being creepy, but I'm really paying attention and sending stuff, Josh's way to add into the game.
And being creepy.
And also being creepy, yes.
Right. It just comes to him naturally. There's a game that we run called Woebegone Winter, which is about a family of sort of religious zealots coming west for the gold rush. And while we run Woebegone Winter, there's something John does that's just absolutely fucking fantastic. He's in the background kind of controlling music in a live way so that it is reactive to the scene. So, things are turning sad. Okay, well, here's a little Ashokan farewell. Oh, it's a combat scene. Great. He'll pull in whatever, I don't know, Old West combat music.
Sure.
But that kind of stuff that like a GM face to face with the players, you just don't have the time and attention to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Or if you are that good where you're like, okay, now I'm going to start this music, you can't help but break immersion to do that, right? So my goal is to so that Josh can keep in the pocket of being interactive with the players and everything else is happening. If they don't even notice that the music's changed and they just feel different because of it, then that is the job that I'm trying to get done.
And so I think that's really interesting because I struggle with using music in games for just the reason you talked about, Josh, where it's like it's one more thing that I have to think about, and it's the first thing that I stop thinking, because and so do you have like a sort of a playlist that you've put together beforehand so that or is Josh, are you getting thrown curveballs with the music?
I mean, it depends on the game, right? This is the other thing is, as we talk about how we handle coGMing, what we do in Jailbreak is worlds apart from what we do in Woebegone Winter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Jailbreak has 9 characters and people are going out of the room. And so you're actually having one GM take players and out into the hallway. Woebegone Winter's all around one table, right? So for some games, we will have a Woebegone Winter or a Jailbreak. We have a playlist. It's like an hour long. It repeats. It's a ticking clock and thunder, and there's no music apart from that. But
that was annoying.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's the emotion we're trying to go for. I want that. I can't leave this place, and I hate what I'm hearing, and I just want this tense. So that's good. Glad you felt that way.
Yeah.
And I think there's an interesting point there when you coGM Jailbreak. It's almost a LARP, really, and it has some of the I'll use the term associated comorbidities. And one of those is that, in my opinion, in LARPs and a little bit in Jailbreak, GM FaceTime is a resource.
Yeah.
And having 2 GMs mitigates that, somewhat, but that game almost immediately fractures into small groups.
For sure.
And if one group leaves, then the other GM is dealing with 2 groups and that sort of thing. And so I can totally see how at the table game it's a very different coGMing experience.
Yeah. Jailbreak is we've had really good games that have worked out. I mean, mechanically they've been seamless and they've worked. Other times it's we're just scrambling to keep up with all the action and whatnot. And that's what you take in as part of the experience when you're going to run 9 people in a room and tensions are high and everybody's excited and there's a lot of energy in the room. Anything can happen. So like I said, we've been running that game for over 10 years at conventions. I think we've had probably more successes than what we consider failures, but there's definitely there's stuff to take away from each time we run it, and we try to adjust. That game's never done for us in terms of us writing it. So
right. So do you think? I mean, because you run a bunch of different systems. You talked about Call of Cthulhu. You've done some Unknown Armies, that sort of thing. Do you find that there are systems that lend themselves more to coGMing or less?
For our style, I mean, I would say for our style, narrative games are great because it already kind of gets people in the mindset of how our coGMing at a table, around a table, kind of works. But if we're going to be mobile, like in Jailbreak or another large game, I think a game that doesn't require any kind of book knowledge and you can just kind of give people a one pamphlet thing.
Mm-hmm.
We have
to
the
read.
1-page, here's your unknown armies primer sheet. That
Right.
we
Roll
have.
2 dice will tell you what happened.
I mean, it worked because I had literally never played Unknown Armies.
Oh, really?
You
And-
still probably haven't.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
but everything I needed was right there, and that was that. It didn't, there wasn't that. Now I'm going to download the rules to you for half an hour. That
yeah.
When I'm looking for a system, I'm looking to avoid that. I want the rules to be sort of organic and understandable. That's why I mainly run Cthulhu, because you can understand. You've got a 30% chance to do that. That just makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think Unknown Armies, the way that you guys did it had a similar factor to it, of just, the rules are going to get out of the way and we're going to get to the story.
Yeah.
I think as much as possible, that's how we try to approach everything. We don't want to do anything heavy crunch. But earlier you were talking about, you prefer rules like games for this reason. This is the other advantage of a 2GM system is I can just completely flake on knowing the rules and insist that John learn everything. And then I can
happened
on him over the course of 20 years to have all the knowledge. Right. So that helps.
So really, your coGMs out of neglect more than anything is what you're saying.
But it's equal neglect across the relationship. So we abuse each other equally.
I thought you read it,
Yeah.
Together.
Right. So at this point, I just get to make it up. I know he hasn't read the material.
Right.
So I can just speak with confidence, and that's enough to get me through.
When you're designing a scenario, you there's not a lot of out of the book scenarios that deal with coGMing. And so when you're designing a scenario, are you sort of intentionally including kind of, okay, and I'll take the driver's seat here and you'll take it here, that sort of thing? Is that being thought of as you're putting it together?
Depends on the scenario.
Hmm.
I mean, we tend to just kind of play jazz, honestly. There's a scenario that we have not yet completed that I would like to complete, that involved John and I running completely separate games that were related. Assault on Singularity Base.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Similar to that, but just 2 rather than 15 or however many games that is.
Yeah, and not as
thin.
Assault on Singularity Base was pretty disparate in terms of what affected what. Ours was going to be, pretty intertwined.
Absolutely.
But when we write stuff, we are writing in a commingled mindset, where everything is, vetted through the other, in terms of just how the story is going to go. I think that we do separate our duties when it comes to hey, I'll do the portraits, you do the backgrounds, that kind of stuff, so we hand those off to each other just to get the job done. But
that's where it's nice to have a coGM. If I could not make characters.
Yeah, right. And then but other than, like I said, the World War I, where we intentionally kind of bait and switch people, where it's you think this guy's running the game, but then it's really this guy.
Right.
I'm not really sure, because that shows that there's a break in the narrative pace, and now they got to get ready to do this other thing. Other than that, I think I write thinking that it's me or you, Josh, running, and the other one's going to be handling, the other, flavor stuff.
Absolutely. Well, the other thing that we do that I find super helpful is we can have one person be kind of on general plot flow, narration, that kind of thing, and then have the other person step in as NPCs.
That's
done that
huge.
too.
Super useful.
Yeah.
Yep. We've done
that worked
too.
really well in Jailbreak. And I mean, you 100% avoid one of my main DMing pet peeves, I'm now going to have a 5-minute conversation with myself,
Right.
Yes. Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And you're doing the this way. then that way,
Right.
and so I mean, I think that's a great way to do a great use for coGMing is just, especially if you've got NPCs that are going to be plot heavy and around for a while, having being able to embody them is really useful. So, like, I guess, why do you coGM? Let's sort of get to the essence of it. Is it just, I mean, and it's totally a fine answer to say because we like to do it, but I mean, it's a unique solution, and I'm wondering what it's solving. What for you does it solve?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Josh.
Thanks for that. What it solves is John doesn't have to answer the hard question.
Yeah. I will give my answer afterwards.
So, I mean, a lot of this started off, like we were saying, with our World War I game. We had 8 players. Jailbreak has 9. So there's part that's just, I think we started doing it because I can't handle 9 players. Players are animals. They're just one step short of Lord of the Flies. It's awful. I hate them. So I need someone else there to wrangle the players. But also, I mean, we've just been working together on stuff most of our lives at this point, and so there's part that's when I have a cool idea for a game, I just naturally want to call John and say, oh my God, I had this idea. And then he will start riffing. And once we're just kind of riffing back and forth with, oh my God, you know what you should do.
Right.
Well, at that point, like that's coGMing.
And it's hard to take a 2-person idea and then say, okay, good luck, go run that.
Right.
I almost feel obligated to help him out, with that. But what it's kind of turned into, like where, in the early days, it probably was, just managing, just a lot of bodies around a table. It has really turned into a better way, at least for me, I think it's a better way to tell a story to the players, right? Where, Josh is fulfilling a role if he's doing the, the at the players, the face there. And I can really focus on, the small conversations that are happening around the table that Josh doesn't even hear, not because it's too loud, but because they're just like, little conversations between 2 PCs and whatnot. I can grab that stuff and feed it into the narrative. And I think it helps people, contribute to that story. And then you get immediate, reward from that when it comes back out onto the table. The other thing I can do is kind of facilitate, like if there's props on the table or something like that, I can do all that stuff and the players can ignore me. I'm just the stagehand at that point, and Josh can continue doing the narrative part. Music's another big piece. Just I think it's a better way to get the story back to the players so that they care about what's going on.
I mean, have you ever played? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
Oh, I was going to say, when you think about like immersion, right? What's more immersive? A guy sitting there telling you a story, or a movie with special effects and music and a bunch of actors?
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to, 5GM anything. But part of what makes a movie work is there's a guy whose job it is to make things look good on screen. Well, that can't all be on one GM.
Yeah.
I don't have 5 years to put this game together, right? So just splitting that up, it makes it a little bit more immersive.
Well, and it also allows whoever's in the driver's seat narratively right then to also be immersed. Because, when I'm running a game by myself, I'm having to think about, okay, I'm Lord Percival Sledge, but I'm also like, what did they just say? And when are we taking a break? And, so there's 87 things going on. And so in your example, I really like the idea of kind of, all right, I'm in the background, but I'm keeping track of all the stuff so that you can be driving the story 100%, and you can just focus on that.
One thing that John does that is just amazing. And a lot of this is just going to be me talking about how great John is.
Well, we're done then.
That is why I asked you to bring him on.
Yeah.
That's right.
Something he does that's great is during the game, he will chat me, okay, this is a 6-hour game. We are now 2 hours in. Do you think that you are at the place you want to be 1/3 of the way through this game? Great. Thank you for that. Because, when your players, I have a real hard time putting a lid on good role playing. If my players are just kind of running away with a scene, I want to let them do it. And I kind of want to let them do it for 5 hours.
Right.
Then it's not a game. Then it's just hanging out with your friends, which is great. But.
Right. Yeah. That is always a struggle. And that's where I, like having somebody to just be like, I think this has run its course, it's almost like having an editor there, which is can be super useful. I can think of a couple times where I wish I'd had that. Or, conversely, somebody saying, "Hey, this is good. Let this keep going." That I'm really interested in the timing concept part of this too, because we run con games, which are per force. You have 6 hours, so pacing is an issue.
Yep.
And having somebody who can think about that long term kind of, all right, you're 1/3 of the way through. Whereas, I'm always just like looking at the clock going, what? Oh, Jesus.
We just got through with the intro.
How can it be 9?
Yeah. I can't, how are we going to do this? And so I think that's a real benefit as well.
Yeah.
So what, we've talked a lot about the advantages and that sort of thing. What are some of the challenges? Like, give me an example of a time when coGMing maybe didn't go as well as you'd hoped it would.
I know exactly the game that you're about to say, Josh.
Yeah.
It was that Trail of Cthulhu game that we ran.
Oh my God. Okay, I don't know how much of this is on us.
It's always on the players. It's always the players.
No.
We had really good players, though. That was the problem.
1,000,000%
it was a stacked deck, and we just yeah.
It was actually this is every time before John and I run a game at a con, we look at the list of players and we just turn to each other and we're like, well,
should we just leave? Let's just go.
Fool myself now to avoid having to humiliate myself in front of the best players on that.
Except at DundraCon, where it's 5 great players and one name you've never heard of. And I'm always like,
X Factor. Yeah.
There are people at DundraCon who have been in our games and who will be like, oh, we're sending a player to you. And he's 15 and just had 19 pixie sticks. And it's not.
He's been playing Werewolf.
Might have been in that Jailbreak game that you were in, Ezra.
Yeah.
But no, so the game that, that I was talking about with the Trail of Cthulhu, what happened was we got way into our own. We both became audience members of our own game, didn't pay attention to any of the time, really enjoyed all of the players that we had there going back and forth and getting into the mystery and the investigation, whatever. Yeah, we got to hour 5 and we had not even gotten halfway to what we wanted to do. And we're like, oh no, this is not good.
Yeah.
And we were both handling dialogue on the side and then kind of downloading into each other on where that meant with the story and whatever. And that's to me, that is the minute that I was like, okay, we can only have one person doing this part. And then somebody else has got to step away and just kind of, just keep everything else going, because we both like to talk and get into the story with characters that want to improv with us and whatever. And that just, we ended up having to rush it. Now, to be fair, I have talked with the players that were in that game years afterwards, and they thought it was fine. We did an okay job, but I know what we could have done with that game, and I'm mad about it. So,
I mean, it's interesting because we'd earlier talked about the importance of sort of pacing and time management, and here we're talking, was that maybe where you did that cause a little epiphany in your style where you sort of were starting to think more about pacing and being a little bit intentional about having one of the GMs keeping an eye on the clock and that sort of thing?
I mean, you only have to drive your car into a river once to be like, well, I'm gonna not drive on the river anymore. So yeah, having one real bad experience is enough. But also, right, like so much of this is game dependent. If we are running jailbreak and it immediately devolves into chaos, whoopee! I mean, like that's we
we
want.
can rock and roll with that, but
Can't do that with a plot heavy game.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it taught me to, to start writing certain beats, almost like an act, 3-act play kind of thing, where here's where we're at 2 hours, 4 hours, that kind of thing. And there's some wiggle room in there. We don't, I don't feel like we're, too hard on the pacing there, but that's why if we start getting a little sideways, now I don't have to stop interacting with players and turn to Josh and say, ooh, we're at 2 hours. Where do you want to be? I can do that, under the radar, and it doesn't interrupt the flow too much, and he can make an adjustment right then.
It also taught us the value of having some parts of the game that are pre-written that we can just throw out. That we can
for
say,
sure.
Hey, you know what? This chunk of the game, it would have been fun. It's great. I'd rather end on time.
Don't really need it. Yeah, for sure.
So when you're this is not really a question. This coGMing is kind of secondary to this question, but it's one that I'm always fascinated in. When you're designing a scenario, where do you start? Do you start at the end and then build backwards? Do you because I'll give you the example. I'm a premise guy. I start with like a vision or an image or like, ooh, I just learned that they quarantined San Francisco Chinatown in 1900 by wrapping barbed wire around it for 4 days.
Sure.
That is, that'd
be an amazing game. Yeah. Totally.
Amazing game.
It's why most of my games have a third act problem, because honestly, the solution is not as interesting to me as the setup, and
yes.
And so where are you in that spectrum? Like, how do you kind of,
I wish I had an answer that sounded like we had the answer to this, but I think our process it evolves every time we write something. I think it has changed since the last game that we ran at a con versus what we're doing now. I think we're always looking for stuff that doesn't work, and how are we going to change the writing process. I think I like to think that nowadays I come at it with, what are the players going to feel at the end of this? And how do we write something that does that? But that wasn't always the way. I really liked clever plot twists, first off, and then we'll write a game around that thing.
Right.
I am a big fan of the premise, idea. Our idea for the Magdalene Laundries was just...
Our ratings just went up.
Yeah, right. Our idea for the Magdalene Laundries was just, hey, John, did you know about the Magdalene Laundries? They were fucked up, man. And then we wrote a game about that. Sometimes for me, it's like I'll have an image or a particular thing that I want to have happen that will really hurt the players.
Yes.
And I want to get that in, so I'll have a premise and, I have a couple scenes. Okay, well, if I have a premise and a couple scenes, at that point we can put it together. Doing Woebegone Winter was us saying, too many people write scary games. What if we write one that's just, sad?
Sad. Yeah.
Deeply upsetting, where afterwards the players don't feel better about themselves or the world. Could we do that?
It was a different kind of horror. Yeah, that's actually true, Josh. That was probably one of the where we decided to move away from the gore horror and move more into the despair type of games. And honestly, I think it's worked well for us.
Absolutely.
I mean, I think you can run horror games that aren't even scary, because like I am not I'm gonna terrify you person. That's just not what I do. And so like I run a I call it my family game, where the premise of the game is that you're a family who is cleaning out your grandfather's house while the will's going to be read, and most of the game is just sniping over like what's for dinner, and like,
I want to play in that game.
Yeah.
I'll run it. So I should run it for y'all sometime.
Yes.
I want to play in it, and John and I should be brothers.
Well, there are brothers.
Each other.
So the weird thing about that game, I think there are 10 characters, and I only ever play with 6 players, and so there's like 4 members of the family that are not really going to be involved that much,
Get 10 people. You need a coGM.
So
yes,
I ran it at maybe I do. I ran it at Big Bad, and somebody went, "This should be a LARP," and I was like, "Thanks."
Actually, so you brought up that Jailbreak would be, you consider it kind of a LARP thing. There was a time where I would be very offended by what you just said, because
how dare
the disparity between LARPs and what I grew up gaming with, just I didn't understand it. But now that I have been to cons and gotten a little more exposure to it, and whatever, I do see the benefit of that style of gaming. I can definitely see where
the energy steps up. If you're
great.
Not like, there's a difference between sitting around a table for 6 hours trying to tell a story and having it on its feet and people are moving around and it's kinetic, and I totally get it. The problem is I'm far more interested in a LARP with 6 people. And, cons want you to have a LARP with like 40 people, like they want you to have it to scale. And that's not what interests me.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I used to run, back in the Conquest days, I used to run paranoia LARPs where I'd have Nerf guns.
Yeah, great.
And like, I just would wait for one of the players to like just randomly fire their gun. And I'd be like, a shot rings out,
Right, totally, yeah.
I love it.
And woe unto them if the dart hit another player.
Yes.
So I'm fascinated by this coGMing thing because it's simultaneously something I really want to do and something that I'm afraid I would be really bad at. Do you think, how would people who don't have your friend telepathy maybe manage a coGMing? Because for me, I'll tell you, I would be very mechanical about it. I'd be very like, okay, here's the things you're going to do. Here's the things I'm going to do. And, and that's what Morgan and I did. I was like, you're going to run all the combat because I don't know the rules. And I'm going to like come up with wacky ideas and, and throw stuff out there. And I mean, that worked, but did it?
Yeah, I gotcha. I think for people who do not have creepy friend telepathy, one of the most important things is going to be having open lines of communication that you don't have to interrupt the game for, right? I always GM with my laptop, both because I can play music, I can bring stuff up on screen, I can turn it around and show the players. There are a lot of things. I keep my notes on there. Paper is, dead trees. I don't need that. And so in the corner, I can always have a little chat window with John open, and he's either on his phone or his laptop in the corner of the room, and he can chat to me, 10 minutes, so-and-so should break down the door, that kind of thing. I think that's a good substitute. There really isn't anything that replaces creepy friend telepathy, but
yeah, I mean, you got to trust the other guy that's running, or girl. You can run with girls. It's okay. But yes, I think being able to trust your partner in crime when running these games, and almost like an improv mentality where anything they're saying is okay with you and you will riff off of it in order to add to it. But whoever is in charge of the scene needs to be the one in charge of the scene, and the other one just really has to kind of step back. I think that's important because your audience, your players are going to be looking towards where's the story coming out of. Yeah, I think that's, if you were going to do it with no technology, then at least do it with an open mentality, and you got to be okay with letting the reins go and letting somebody else have them for a little bit, while you're just there trying to make it better for everybody else, even though you're not the one running the show.
Yeah, I think that point you made about the players needing a focus and not splitting that is super important.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the other thing about sort of coGMing, and especially with writing scenarios, that kind of thing, is, you know, the writing advice, kill your babies, kill your darlings. Right. The thing about coGMing is you have to be okay with someone else killing your baby.
Yeah.
Someone else holding your baby that you love this idea, you love this scene, and you have to be okay with your coGM just saying, look, it's a great scene, but
we're out of time. We got to keep going. This doesn't work. Now, hopefully we get that done in the writing process before we bring it to the table. But there have been times where it's like, hey, we're not going to get to this. We need to jump to this if we want to, you know, have any kind of closure for that.
Right.
So we talked a little bit, you know, you have a World War I game, you know, you've run a various like historical scenarios, and this again is not a coGMing question. This is just something that I thought of as we were talking about this. Like, I find running historical games fraught. Like, I have a rule in my head: I will never run a World War II game, because there will be somebody there who's like, well, actually,
I know the guy.
Yeah. I know a couple of them. Most of them are too polite to do it, but
totally,
you know, and I mean, I can lead with all of the provisos that I want to say, like, you know, I'm not a historian, this is going to be wrong, you know, that sort of thing.
The provisos.
The proviso, yeah.
So honestly, I find Gil will go along with.
He's amazing, actually. We give him shit, but he's actually really good to have in the game.
Some other people, you know, get bogged down in, I don't care how much armor that tank has. It's cinematic that, you know, that shot does whatever. And
you know,
how do you run a satisfying historical game while acknowledging that we're not historians?
I mean, we've been lucky with the games that we've gotten to run. I mean, I think we do a good job with establishing history or the historical context of the game in the background, and we are trying to make it more about the people in the scenes and in the game themselves, and what's being passed back and forth there is probably has more ubiquity than you know, players being able to connect back with all the trivia that they know about the historical era.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that as much as there will always be those players who know twice as much about World War II as you do, there are going to be far more players who don't know anything about World War II, you know? And so a little bit of historical knowledge kind of goes a long way. We're not telling a story about World War II writ large. We're telling a story about these 5 guys who have been a tank crew lost in the woods for the past week. And hey, look, they finally found their way out, and that's where the story begins.
Yeah.
You know, you don't need to know Rommel's tactics in North Africa. It's a story about these 5 guys.
Yeah, and you know, we try to do a good job with keeping everybody immersed. But if you're the type of player whose immersion will get broken because, you know, we gave you a type of rifle that hadn't been built in that year, and it's not going to be around for another 2 years or whatever, then, you know, maybe this isn't the kind of game for you, but we'll do our best to connect with them anyway. Right. So
do you use, you guys, you know, Jailbreak definitely deals with some mature subjects and that sort of thing. What sort of safety tools do you use, especially around with con games and that sort of thing?
I mean, we've used kind of the X card system. Certainly, you know, we have tried to become more aware of trigger warnings, that kind of thing. It can be hard in a horror game where there's a twist, you know, because like if the twist is in the 3rd act, everyone dies in a flood, you want to be able to warn people that there will be drowning. We have a good friend that we play with who drowning is one of her triggers. That can be in a game. But if that's the big reveal,
Right.
So it's hard.
Yeah.
Probably my favorite method is to get a list of people's triggers up front.
Yeah.
Preferably before they are in the game, so that you don't have, all right, well, I guess it's a landslide in the third act. Goddamn. But sometimes that's not possible, and you just do your best.
Yeah. I mean, we've had, we do the disclaimer, and in Jailbreak in particular, because it's just a potpourri of people showing up. You don't know who you're going to get. I'll take groups of people outside when I talk to them about their character and just kind of ask like, hey, is there anything you are just don't want to deal with or whatever? And then before the game starts, Josh and I will kind of, come together and make sure that stuff is in it. Although I think the last Jailbreak game, some safety areas were set up, and I violated them by tackling Guild to the ground, which I regret to this day.
Well, but I think there's an interesting point there where, there's a challenge. I think an inherent challenge with safety tools and familiarity, where
between buddies and stuff.
Between if I have a different, and this is not, I'm not saying this is a good or bad thing, but I have a different threshold with y'all than I do with, generic con guy number 7. Totally. And it's going to be a different game if I know everybody at the table. And honestly, something that I struggle with is if I know 5 of the people at the table, that threshold slides a little more, and yeah. I mean, I think you felt that with that Jailbreak game as well.
Totally.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, most of the people in there had either played it before, so they knew exactly what was happening, or I was buddies enough with to where I felt I could get away with, what would probably be, not good for, just general public.
Yeah. Right.
But no, it's definitely hard. We've had some success. I've actually written a game with Josh that I intended to co-GM at what was the con? Was it ShadowCon?
Oh yeah.
Where we got a list of people's triggers up front, but I ended up not being able to GM it with him. So I sent him off on his own. But that was helpful so that we could ahead of time we could write the stuff or change it as we needed to or whatnot.
Right. Spiders are not going to be a part of this show.
Totally.
That sort of thing. Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you guys have been very, very generous with your time. I really appreciate it. So what are, you both run, you sometimes you run games where you're not co-GMing, as you mentioned. And what is the best GMing advice you ever got? Because that's the genesis of the name of this podcast was, in a weird Zen way, the best GMing advice I ever got was just keep the game moving.
Yep.
Cool. Yeah.
And I always that's always been in the back of my head. But what about for you? What's the best advice that you've
ever gotten? Or that I would give?
Or that you would give?
Okay. Go ahead, Josh. Harken back to your long history.
No one ever has given me good advice. Are you kidding? People are monsters. I think that it really, more than anything, and this is kind of one of the big secrets. It's the players, and so get good players. I think that that's half of what the high production value gaming is about. Is if this is a guy who always has character portraits and interesting handouts and well-developed backstories, you're going to get good players because they recognize that you are someone who put a lot of energy into the game. And it's not that the character portraits and the interesting backgrounds and the props matter, but putting a lot of attention into the game matters, and something that signals to your players that this is a ride. This is some stuff that I put a lot of time into, and maybe you won't like it, but it's not going to be something that I blew off to get into DundraCon free.
Right.
Sure.
And that's the interesting to me sort of inherent pressure or challenge with con games is that, you're spinning the wheel of players and, I hope I get 4 out of 5.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
For me, it's been an ongoing evolution for me. For 10 years ago, or maybe just over 10 years ago, I would not have chosen to go to a con and run games. I really got convinced to go through Josh, and I met some pretty amazing people as a result of it. So I've been willing to change the way I've come at gaming, but lately my goal as a GM is to get the players that play in my games to tell stories about those games to other people who have no frame of reference, and to communicate either how the players felt or to tell the story from their character's perspective through that game, and not really focus on how clever my plot was. Like, how did it affect them?
Right.
Or how do they empathize with the characters that played in the game? If that's the type of story that's being told, I think anybody can enjoy that, even if they weren't in it. So yeah, that my tip is, don't focus so much on plot and focus more on how to get the players to empathize with their characters and what in your game world.
I just want to make a player cry.
Yes.
That's really all. If we can make someone cry, and often we do, and I feel
it has happened.
Yeah.
Tackling Gil to the ground could make him cry, probably.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. Josh actually made me cry during a game that we were co-running, and I'm like, "Ooh, man, you went there." So, at that point, I was an audience member as well, and so kudos to you, Josh. Even though I knew it was Woebegone Winter, it's the first time we ran it.
Oh, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Awesome. I feel good about that.
That game will do it, man.
Yeah.
So what are your favorite systems to run? And not necessarily for coGMing. Like, if you're going to run a game, like, what system are you going to use?
I mean, probably like Delta Green and Call of Cthulhu is a pretty good standard for me. Anything that's got a sanity or horror mechanic, I'm happy to, but I don't take the system like wholesale. Like, I will cut it up and I like pushing, which isn't a part of Delta Green. So I'll take that in. I don't like luck, so I'll throw that out, that kind of thing. I'll make the system work for the way that I want to tell the game.
Yeah. If you have ever read the intro to the combat chapter for Second Ed, Unknown Armies,
that
on its own convinced me that it is my favorite game. It is a game that I want to run all the time. It's basically a page and a half of like, hey, combat is a super stupid idea. Why would you do something so stupid? You might die. And if you don't die, you might kill someone. And that's not good either. The hell is wrong with you? And like, role-playing games have been so combat focused for so long, right? Like, my fighter has a longsword, right? That like a little bit of this game takes place in our world or something very similar to it. And so if you start trying to kill a guy with a knife, like, there are repercussions. You can't just do that. Things will happen as a reaction, So
I think that's a great point. Honestly, that's one of the reasons that I run Cthulhu so much, is that, in a fantasy world, I'll go in a village and I'll just start killing people because ha ha ha, whereas even if it's in the 1920s, like, if I shoot a person, the police will become involved, and we understand the sort of moral structure there, as opposed to in the fantasy world, but they're a bad race. I'm supposed to kill goblins.
When I do this, I get XP. So why am I not wanting to do this?
Right.
I must detect evil. They're clearly evil. That makes them all right. Right.
I should be able to murder them. I think that's a great point. And it's I'm really interested in how you take those kind of, I always joke that I want to run a D&D game where the party are the villain. Like, the whole game is just villages being like, you monsters! What are you? So what is a system you haven't run that you really want to run?
Oh, God. So I believe really strongly that everyone has their white whale game. The game that they think is absolutely brilliant, and there's no way they're ever going to run it. for me, it is Nobilis.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
The author is just absolutely brilliant, and everything that is written in that game is absolutely brilliant, and it's so amazing, and I just can't, and I'm not gonna, and it's
Do the 30-second elevator pitch on Nobilis, because this is one that people might not have heard of.
oh god,
Yeah.
It's basically a role-playing game where you play like the Endless from Sandman, right? You play anthropomorphic personifications of eternal concepts. So it could be death or destiny or despair, but it could also be chicken wings or love or cats or cats without tails, so it can be big concepts, small concepts, and it's totally diceless, and it's incredibly high concept, and it's really brilliant. And the second ed book is gorgeous, and everyone should go buy it. Not that it's available, but whatever.
What about you, John?
I mean, there are games that Josh and I have talked about designing, and the system that we think we want to run it in. Like, we've never done like a teenager horror game, so like Kids on Bikes
Monster
or
Hearts
Tales from the Loops or something like that. But like for me personally, like stuff that I haven't gotten done that I want to get done is I really became enamored with Fate and Fate style games. And there are games that I think that we have mechanically ran in the past that I think would do better as a Fate type game with more narrative contributions from the player base. So I would like to rerun some of the stuff that we've done as Fate games and see what the players come up with in terms of their collaboration. But
that's a cool idea. I might start asking the question on this game, on this thing, like, what game have you run that you want to run in Fate? Because I could totally totally take any one of your scenarios and make it a Fate game.
Yeah.
So what are you thinking? Jailbreak and Fate?
No. But some of the
Woebegone Winter would totally work.
Woebegone Winter is a pretty good one. We had another group of games that we ran at early Dead of Winter called Alter Septum, which was a 1940s based investigatory game, and I think we ran it in Nemesis or like one of the other Unreal Engine types.
First one was Nemesis.
I think I would like more of the player contributions in that one, and maybe seeing how it is a little more pulpy, that kind of thing. So
it's a fantastic setup. It's sort of film noir meets pulp meets like madcap romantic comedies of the 40s, right? So it's kind of the people leading this detective agency have a will they won't they sort of a relationship.
Right.
A lot of fun.
Nice. I want to play that game now. All right, so we close every episode the same way. This is, you each are going to answer this. It's the Space Jam question.
Oh, don't know.
Aliens have invaded the Earth,
right?
And they will destroy the planet unless you run a super entertaining 4-hour game. What are you running?
4-hour.
Yeah.
We are going to coGM to run.
Oh, you could. Yeah,
we have to coGM it.
I think if we coGM, it only saves half the planet. We'll have to run 2 4-hour games or 8-hour.
Yeah, it's like getting into Dedricon rules. You got to run 2 coGM games to get your GM slip.
How many slots are you filling there?
Ooh, man. I mean, is it a previous game that we've ran,
or a scenario you want to run? Matt Steele had this amazing answer of, he's like, I'd run this scenario because it would teach the aliens the beauty of humanity, and I was like,
oh, we don't have that answer.
Yeah, no. Everything I would teach would make them destroy the planet.
Yeah, Matt's a much better person than either Josh or I. So, we would just want to make them sad enough to leave, I think. So, yeah, I mean, Woebegone Winter would be a good one that I think, they were like, well, we could condense a few things. If you take out the part that made me cry, I think we could condense it down to 4.
Or make it just the part that made him.
Yeah, right.
Just that. And just really stretch it out. I know the music that we would use for it. How about that?
What's the what's that Delta Green scenario? Clyde? What's that one?
That's the first one. Is it What We Left Behind? Last Things Last.
Yeah,
Last Things last. Yeah, we could definitely.
That's a solid 4-hour scenario.
It really is. Yeah. So we could do that one.
Nice. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Folks, if you have a chance, if you're local to the Bay Area and you have a chance at a con to play a game that Josh and John are running together, I can't recommend it highly enough. I have done it before. I'll do it again. Guys, thanks so much for spending some time with us, and thank you for watching. Thank you for your likes and your subscribes, and we will see you next time on Keep the Game Moving.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much.